I'm here in Illinois and in other parts of the United States. So we're going to get going on our Lunch and Learn webinar for today. So thank you to all of you that are taking a few minutes to join us live for the webinar. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. Now, if you're watching it as a recording because you weren't able to join us live, just please be sure to email us. We'll put our email in the comments in the chat of the webinar. And also when it's on Facebook, we'll put our email address there and you can just reach out and we'll be happy to answer any questions later. So here is a little bit about Mission Partners for Christ. We send teams of doctors and volunteers to unreached communities in Africa so that they can receive life-saving medical care also while hearing the gospel for the very first time. And here is a little bit about me. I am the president and the founder of Mission Partners for Christ. I'm very, very passionate about this work. I'm so grateful that God called me to do this work. I'm trying to remember where that picture was taken. Oh, I think it was taken in Burundi. You see that little necklace on there? That's from Burundi. So it was a great experience. And they're continuing to do some great work there in Burundi. All right, so today I'm going to introduce my guest. We're going to have some time to answer your questions at the end. And then we'll talk about what is the next step, specifically the next step for you. So this tells you a little bit about my guest, Dr. Mark Paschall, and I am so grateful that he is here today. He comes with a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience, and he's very familiar about the impact and the importance of medical missions. So I'm really glad to have him here with me today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, if you want to just say hi to our guests that have joined us today, and then I'm going to go into our first question.
Well, thank you, Sheri. It's certainly a privilege to be here and glad to be able to talk about this important topic.
Great. Wonderful. So, let's talk about those first steps into the mission field and why is it so important to get involved early?
Well, I think the next slide talks about me getting involved in missions and exactly what impact that had on my career. I grew up in a relatively small denominational church, probably 200 or 300, but the pastor was always very missions minded. And we were always having missionaries come through and they would show their slides and they would bring artifacts and we would hear their stories. We would have missionary banquets and events. So I always knew that there were pastors and that there were these special families that would go overseas to do this kind of work. But right about the time that I was beginning to think medicine might be part of my career, I had always thought I would be a pastor and most likely a chaplain. But as a sophomore in high school, my 15-year-old mind was just blown when a missionary doctor came to our church and spoke. And then a year later, a nurse from the same hospital that he worked at in Ivory Coast, West Africa came, and they came with their stories and their slideshows. And I just immediately felt a pull from God that this was the direction where he was leading me. Now, providentially, at the same time that I'm mulling all of this over, I was accepted into a program at the University of Michigan that integrated undergraduate studies with medical school. But the key for me was that I didn't have to reapply to medical school. So, right when I'm thinking that perhaps God is leading me into medical missions, I'm essentially accepted to medical school right from high school. And so that had a big, big impact. But what really made the difference for me was the opportunity I had to go spend 12 weeks with that same doctor and nurse in Ivory Coast while I was still an undergrad. Now, that's another story for another day. The amount of struggle and delay and rebellion that took place before we actually returned there as career missionaries. But the point is that the seed was planted in me really as a sophomore in high school. And I think you could say even before that, as I was just a youth growing up in that church with the missions exposure that I had.
Wow, Dr. Pascal, I cannot imagine at the age of 15 when you're still in high school, okay, and most people are thinking about getting their driver's license, okay, or who is there going to be their girlfriend, or even
Right,
senior year of the prom. And God's already touching your heart at that early age and pulling you to missions. And then to take that step out of your comfort zone for 12 weeks to go and serve. I love that you had
right,
the opportunity to serve with those that you had met and those that had touched
right.
your heart initially, but how incredible. Wow.
Hmm.
So definitely, I know we have the right person on here to share today on this webinar.
Hmm.
So let me see why I'm thinking. Okay, our next question is, why is it important to get involved in missions in the early stages of your medical career?
Well, as you know, Sherry, just life in a medical career just gets busier and busier the more advanced you get, and there's so many things vying for your time and attention. I could always go back to that certainty that I felt on that short-term trip as an undergraduate. And I had heard the missionary stories, and I had read their newsletters, and I had seen their slides. But really, until you experience that for yourself, and until every sense is overwhelmed with the sights and the smells and the sounds, and you find yourself in a situation where you're just completely unnerved and you're starting to think, no, in a million years, I could never do this. And then you realize that you're right, that you could never do this, but it's
Mhm.
only something that you could do through God.
Right.
And that's really what grabbed me and
Mm.
changed the trajectory of my career. I think it's ideal if this can happen early in the stages of your medical career, really, even in medical school. And so, if you're sensing a leading or a calling towards missions in medical school, that can change the electives that you'll do as you get into your clinical years. It can inform the choices of the interest groups and the volunteer opportunities that you want to do. It can certainly help with your choice of a specific residency and really even the discipline that you would choose. If God is leading you in that direction, then He might lead you in a completely different discipline than perhaps you'd been thinking originally. So, again, I think the sooner the better, and right in medical school is just an ideal time.
Wow. That's some really good information, and you're using your experience about how you got involved early and
Mhm.
and you stepped out of your comfort zone and went and served. And it's unexplainable, isn't it? Our
It
first,
really is.
I mean, we try to
Hmm.
explain it and tell people about it, but until you're there and you truly experience it, it's really life-changing. So I agree
Hmm.
with you, the importance of getting involved early.
Hmm.
So, how about this question? How can aspiring medical missionaries prepare themselves for ministry?
Well, I don't want to be trite here, but I think we can all agree that prayer is just essential, that this does need to come from God. But I would also say that as you sense that, seek out counsel from others. If God is really calling you to this type of overseas work, He's going to confirm that every step of the way for you. I also see that there really are three other areas important for preparation. Obviously, I'm a big supporter of short term trips, and I say that not only because of the important role that it played in my career, but really just exactly what you referred to. And it's the effect that I have that I can see that it has on my residents that I've been able to take to Kenya. At times, I almost feel like a failure as a team leader because every single resident has always come back saying, we just had no idea. It was just impossible to be prepared for that. And we have just spent 6 months looking at slides and videos and talking about culture shock and talking about cross cultural ministry and all of those things. And yet, every one of them expresses that they could never have really understood the need until they experienced that firsthand. And I think that that is just what makes all the difference. Secondly, there are just so many resources that are available now to the extent that one really needs to be quite discerning. I
Mhm.
think most of you are probably familiar with medicalmissions.com. This is a group that has done a lot of the research for you. And so if you will go to that URL, medicalmissions.com, you will find seminars and you will find short-term opportunities with groups that have already been vetted to countries all around the world. You will find links to specific organizations, and you can read missionary stories, you can watch missionary stories, you can hear all of this just in that one URL. There's just a wealth of information there. And then thirdly, I think in-person conferences are also very, very important. They're just very, very energizing, very helpful. Now,
Mhm.
the one that I'm most familiar with is the Global Missions Health Conference, and that's held at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville every November. But that is a place where you can really learn that you are part of a much larger group here, that it's not just your local medical school, it's not just your local community, it's really not even just the country that you feel God might be leading you to. When you attend conferences like this, you can literally see what God is doing all around the world. And you can see just so many different ways that you can get involved with that. So I would certainly encourage short-term trips, resources that you can find online, and then I think in-person conferences are also very, very important.
Wow, those are some great tips. And I mean, I love the first one that you started off with about prayer. That is so
Mm,
important. I was just having a little conversation with the Lord earlier today saying, well, if you've called me to this, you are faithful, you will always work it out. And so,
hmm
and we can see how God did that in your life from an early
hmm
age there at 15. But those are some wonderful suggestions, the resources that are available. The conference, that's actually where we got connected with you
It
about a
is.
year
Hmm
ago, and what a God ordained connection. So excited. We will be there. We'll have a booth this year. I will be there personally. I know you plan to be there, right?
Yes.
And we can meet others and share personally some of our testimonies and experiences being on the field, but then also just being around others that have a desire to serve and use their gifts
hmm
in healthcare. It's so wonderful to just be together with others in that type of setting. So I
Oh, yeah.
love those suggestions.
hmm
So, what are some ways that people can plan ahead at different stages of their career? If they're a medical student, they're a resident, they are a practicing medical professional.
Well, I've alluded and talked quite a bit about the stage of medical school, but those that are in medical school, many times medical schools will have global committees or international committees. They're not necessarily always involved with missions, but it's at least a group of people that are interested in overseas work. And I think seeking those out and getting involved with them is very important. As I've already mentioned many times, there's interest groups that you can get involved with where you can learn quite a bit about what's happening in your area. Certainly, electives are something that's important, volunteer opportunities. Many medical schools sponsor free clinics, and a lot of medical schools are involved with street medicine, care to the homeless.
Mhm.
Anything that you can do that's going to increase your cross-cultural experience and exposure and work with the marginalized. I think those are opportunities that are definitely going to be there as you try to seek them out. The other thing I would suggest is really research your professors and your attendings. I think you'll be surprised how many of them are interested in this or possibly even already involved in this. I used to love when I would get inquiries from medical students, and many times I would just out of the blue get a medical student who would email me and say, I heard about your trip to Kenya and your work in Ivory Coast. This is something I'm interested in. Could we get together and chat sometime? And if you're able to find those attendings and professors, I promise they're going to be very open. They're going to be very interested in meeting with you and getting to talk about what their interests are. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. And then, of course, I think the choice of your residency training is key. And I
Mhm.
think that you really do need a program that is already actively involved in overseas work. And when I say that, I mean not the program where you go to interview and they say, yeah, we've been thinking about that. And we would certainly be on board if somebody expressed interest in that. From my experience at my own hospital in Detroit, if that's the stage that they're at, you probably are not going to be able to do an overseas trip during your residency. It just takes several years to really get this up and rolling. You also need to make sure that the sending hospital or the sponsoring hospital is also on board with this. You can have a program director and you can have a faculty that say, oh, yeah, we would certainly encourage you to pursue that. But unless the sponsoring hospital is willing to send a resident on an overseas elective, it just might not happen. Now, these overseas trips are at the core of many residency programs. It's just part of their DNA. And if you go to that Global Missions Health Conference, you will be able to meet many of them. They have booths set up, and you'll be able to talk to their faculty and their residents, and you can really learn a lot about these trips. But I would at least recommend that you seek out a program that is already involved in some overseas work at this point. For those in residency, as we've already said, the short-term trip is certainly essential. But one additional thing to say about that, you don't necessarily have to do that where you feel like God is leading you. So if you feel like God is leading you to Southeast Asia and you're looking at a program that only does trips to Africa, I wouldn't necessarily look at that as a negative. Your short-term trip in residency does not necessarily need to be an audition elective. I think just getting you overseas, getting you out of your comfort zone, giving you that experience, I think that's what's really important. And I wouldn't worry so much about exactly where that is as you're choosing a residency program. So that would be for those in residency. Finally, for the practicing professional, there are many, many short-term possibilities. Now, I recently retired, and so I'm looking to increase my short-term involvement. And for me personally, Mission Partners for Christ was a group that just checked all of the boxes. And as Sheri said, I came in contact with them, got to know them through this GMHC. They do medical trips, so obviously that's what I'm interested in. They only minister in the continent of Africa, and that just happens to be where I feel that God is leading me. But this is a group that goes and partners with groups that are already there. They're not somebody who tries to kind of blow in for 2 weeks and set something up and then blow back out and really not leave anything in place. They already have relationships with these groups in Africa, and they're just coming along and they're partnering with them and they're working alongside them. And that to me is exactly what short-term trips should be doing. And I've looked at their website, and I encourage you to do that as well. They do trips all over Africa. They have a trip to the Gambia, and I remember looking at that and thinking, I don't even know where the Gambia is, but I want to go. And at some point in the future, I'm hoping I can go to the Gambia with this group just because I know what they do and I know what they've accomplished through the years. Again, as practicing professionals, there are a lot of interest groups at local medical schools, and I think that is really a key place to start. There's also, as we've already mentioned, a lot of global committees, and I was able to get involved with this at my local medical school, Wayne State University. They had an international medicine committee. They had no interest really in missions. It was more just global medicine, but they invited me to speak at one of their conferences. And so on an international medicine conference, I had 30 minutes to talk about our short-term trips to Kenya. And I was able to talk about why we do that. What's the motivation for you taking residents over to work with this church group in Kenya? And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities if you'll really look for those. Of course, there's CMDA chapters at local medical schools. The more you look, I think the more you're going to be able to find that there are ways to get involved even as a practicing physician. But I think the point of everything that we've been saying here today is don't wait. Don't think that you need to wait until you're already in medical school. And don't think that you've got to wait till you're already in residency. Don't think you've got to wait until you're already a practicing physician. You need to get involved with medical missions just as early in your career as you can. And as soon as you feel God leading you in that direction, even if it's in high school, then that I think is really key. And that's going to open up just a lot more opportunities for you.
Wow. That some incredible suggestions. My thought here while you were sharing is People are going to have to go back and listen to this recording on this webinar a couple times because of all of the nuggets that you have given us in just the last 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you for speaking so highly of the work that God has called us to do through Mission Partners for Christ. We are excited to have you join us in February of next year on a trip. And
Hmm.
truly, we do. It's important to us to have those established relationships in those countries because we want the work to continue. And we are totally invested in these villages that have
Hmm.
limited access to medical care, often living in poverty, and most of all, that they're unreached with the gospel. So, I was thinking back of the picture that I had earlier on where I had the Burundi necklace. And even though I wasn't there a couple weeks ago, there is a team of doctors that are Burundi doctors. They had never done an outreach before serving alongside of our team. And now they are going out 3 to 4 times a year to unreached communities. We are coming alongside of them to encourage and support them and pray for them while they go out. But medical missions is continuing. Now, most likely, if we hadn't gone to that country, they may not have initiated that at some point.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
and even it's important to us. That's why we're holding this webinar to get people involved early. I often think like, okay, when I was a younger nurse, what if I would have got involved? But I know that when I went on that first trip with my church, wow, more than 15 years ago. And I was like, well, why didn't you tell me about this sooner? This is so life changing. And that's why we did
Hmm.
this talk. We want to encourage people to get involved early on. We do have scholarships that are available for medical students. And so they do get a significant amount off of the trip when they participate. It isn't a lengthy scholarship process, but we want to get people involved early. So
Hmm.
let's see. Now we want to answer any questions that you have. So, did you put any questions in the chat for us? We're happy to answer. Okay, I got a couple questions here for us. All right. So, what are your favorite books or resources on missions?
The one of the books that really impacted me a lot was Jesus MD, by the former director of CMDA. And that just tells his story as a career missionary. But I was able to relate quite a bit to that. There's been a number of other books. Richard Stern's The Hole in Our Gospel. I think everyone that should just be required reading for everybody.
Mm,
That just really talks about, clearly we all understand that the primary need everybody has is for Jesus in their life. And that's why we're all doing this. But at the same time, Jesus always had a holistic approach. Jesus always was interested in their economics, and he was interested in their health and their well-being, and just this whole idea of shalom, bringing peace to the individual, and that has to occur in a setting of wellness. And so I think there's a number of books like that you can read that will really just kind of push you in that direction to really understand just how important medical missions is. I would also, again, if you'll go to that medicalmissions.com, they have bibliographies,
mm,
and they will have page after page of references, and they will be based on a particular question. If you're looking specifically at work in Africa, there will be a bibliography that will point you to in the right direction there. So again, utilize as many of those resources as you can.
mm. Those are great. Now, I don't think I haven't read that book. The Hole in Our Gospel. Okay.
Yes. Hmm.
All right. I think I'm going to have to check that one out. One that
Sure.
originally, it's not specifically medical, but one that really stood out to me is The Insanity of Obedience. I don't know if you ever
Mm.
read that one by Nick
Yes.
Ripken.
Yes.
Yeah, that book was
Yeah.
great. Show me about the
And just
importance. Yeah.
yes.
Pushing past fear and knowing there are so many that live in persecution, while we
Hmm.
just have those freedoms here in the United States to get together and worship and even Christian schools and things like that, and they
Hmm.
don't have that. So
Right.
but I love those suggestions. So I
Mhm.
think we have another question that came in. All right. So, what would you say to your 20-year-old self now that you've experienced a lifetime of missions work?
Well, I think I would probably, looking back, you would say that you really don't have any regrets pursuing what you did. Now, like I said, there were some struggles, there was some rebellion. I don't want it to sound like from a 20-year-old on, I was just so committed and that's what my whole life was all about. It wasn't quite like that, but at the same time, you never regret that initial decision that you feel like God is leading you into that and that you pursued that. And the thing that I think I've been most impressed now that I am retired and can reflect a little back on my career is just really how when God calls you to do something like that, you can ignore it and you can turn your back on it, but God's call never really goes away. And so every time then when you find yourself back in a setting where you can hear God's voice and you can listen to God, you realize that I called you as a 20-year-old. I called you as a 15-year-old, and that hasn't really changed. And so I think God is really faithful that once He calls us, He's just going to keep pursuing us and He's going to keep putting things in our lives that point us in that direction where He wants us to go. And I know it's not that easy at times. You do hear about people that say, I saw the light, I was called, I never had another doubt. And I understand that it's not always like that, that you do struggle and you wonder, is this really what he's leading me to do? But again, I think if it really is coming from God, you will get to the point where you realize that he's continuing to call you to that. And at every stage that you enter the career, he's still calling you to that. And so that's why medical school residency, practicing physician, and even a retired individual, I
Mm,
think in medicine, if God's led you there, he's going to keep pushing you in that direction really for the rest of your life.
mm. I like that you touched on that at the end because I think the people that were listening in heard that you just recently retired. And
Hmm.
so just knowing even, maybe you think, okay, well, I'm just retiring, but God still has a place for you. And so we often see that it's people newly in retirement that have more time to serve in missions. Or I have noticed we have one doctor that serves with us regularly, and she's getting ready to retire, or she's slowing down in
Hmm.
her practice. She's not working as much. So this is something, and it's never too late, even if you didn't start earlier on in your residency, or, we all talked at the beginning about those distractions that always come up, but it's
Hmm.
never too late to get involved. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was speaking with a physician at the Global Missions Health Conference. He was retired. He'd been doing this type of work for 20 some years, and I was asking him. I said, I'm retired now, and I'm just afraid that the window's closing for me to get involved. And he just lit up and he said, No, no, no. The window is just opening. You are just now going to have opportunities that you may not have been able to take before. And so I think it's an excellent point you make that all throughout our careers and really all through our lives, if God has called you to this, there are always going to be opportunities for you to pursue that.
Right. Excellent. Okay. I'm loving that these questions are coming in. So we got another one. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. How do residency programs typically view medical missions experience? And what advice would you give about timing missions during medical school to maximize both the learning experience and the person's career? Now, that's a mouthful. Did you get all that?
Yes, yes. I think, first of all, programs look on this very favorably. I can at least tell you in the family medicine world that this is something every medical student expresses some interest in. When I was program director and we would do interviews, many people would have only applied to our program because they knew that we did overseas work. And
Mm,
hospitals, and I think just the residency world in general understands this is very, very important to medical students. And so I think it's viewed very favorably. As far as the timing for our program, we always made that third year residents that in the first half, September of their third year, is when we would often encourage that they get involved with one of these overseas trips. Obviously, first year that it doesn't really lend itself to that. Second year, there's not as much elective time, so that's why we chose third year. Medical school, though, the after the first couple years, as you get into the clinical years, I think that's really when you can start to research and really learn a lot about what's available through your school as far as global medicine goes. But again, just the sooner you can start doing that research, the better.
Yeah. And I think people are going to find out that if they register, they decide to go on a trip, those that have already worked on a trip before are so excited to get them involved and have them shadowing and working
Oh yeah.
alongside of them so that they
Hmm.
also become passionate about medical missions.
Right, definitely.
So I think this has been great. Like I said, people are going to have to go back and listen to this again because you gave so many helpful nuggets. So,
Yeah.
what is the next step? And whenever we do a talk or we want to encourage people to take the next step, and I know that Dr. Paschall, you have given a lot of tips and suggestions, reading books and many different resources and things like that, definitely praying. But we would love to have you join us on an upcoming trip next year in 2026, 2027. Don't wait too long. Our trips do fill up, but we will put in the chat what our website is, and you can go and check out our upcoming trips. I always meet with everybody individually, answer all of your questions. And we do have resources for fundraising. Like I said, we have the scholarship if you're a medical student. So would love for you to connect with us and take that next step. So don't delay. I'm hoping that you're really inspired today by the things that we talked about, that you're ready to move forward and take that next step. And we're here to support you in that. So I mentioned this about the next step and upcoming trip, and there is our website. We'll also put that um, in the chat. If you see this picture here, this is Kathleen. It's a wonderful testimony of this woman. She has been on, I would say, about 6 or 7 short-term trips with us. And God just was stirring her heart in such an incredible way. So she went through a more of a lengthy missions training program, and she is committed to her life toward full-term service. Her background is she was a nurse. She worked at a school. She retired from that. And so now she's serving long term. And actually, she was in Kenya for about two and a
Oh,
half
really?
years. And she are two
Ah.
2.5 months initially, and she was doing some
Hmm.
language learning. But this is just
Hmm.
one testimony. But we're not pushing anybody today or encouraging anything long term, other than just making this a regular part of your life and suggesting that first you get involved in a short-term trip.
Hmm.
So we want to thank each of you for joining us today on our lunchtime webinar. And like I said, if you have any additional questions, just reach out to us by email. If there's specific questions for our guest, we're happy to be happy to reach out to him and get the answer to those questions. But we would also love to see you at that conference. That will get you even
Hmm.
more pumped up and inspired if you can join us in Louisville, Kentucky, and that's in November. We could probably
Yeah.
also put the name of that in the chat so that you see the name of the conference, or, excuse me, a link to the website. So, Dr. Paschall, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a true honor and a privilege to have you. So,
Oh, thank you.
and
It's been a privilege. Thank you for inviting me.
yeah, and I look forward to seeing you in November and then
Yes,
early next year on the mission field. So,
that's right.
okay. All right. Take care. And I heard you're going to Kenya pretty soon.
We are a week from Saturday. We have a group of 13 that will be going. So we do this every September for a 2-week trip.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I'll be praying for that upcoming trip, trusting God for
Okay.
many testimonies. Okay. Take care.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.